It was 1998, and one of baseball's most sacred records was about to fall.
Well, it's the sexiest record in sports. I mean, there's nothing harder to do than hit a home run.
I watched the home run race as a 10-year-old in St. Louis, where Mark McGwire was a baseball god.
For our generation, you are Babe Ruth.
Well, thank you.
I was obsessed. I saved ticket stubs, calculated stats by hand, stayed up long past bedtime listening to Cardinals games on a clock radio. And I'm not alone. The home run race cast a spell over millions of baseball fans. But we had no idea what we were really falling for.
That's the introduction of the trailer for the podcast Crushed, which has had two episodes released on its way to a full season of 7. It's put out by PRX, Religion of Sport. The creator and the host of the Crushed podcast and former SI sports writer Joan Niesen joining us here today. Joan, appreciate your time. I imagine, and you've done incredible work with at least the first 2 episodes. I can't wait for the third that's going to come out on Thursday. You've done really good work here, but I imagine as somebody that, as you just mentioned here that I just played here, someone that was 10 years old, when you saw this home run chase up close as a St. Louis citizen and a Cardinals fan, this has to be like a bit of a cathartic project for you, isn't it?
That's a great word for it. Yeah, cathartic. I like that. It's definitely been a project that's forced me to examine a lot of my feelings about sports and the things that made me fall in love with sports, which pretty much was the home run race. And obviously it's a very complicated event in retrospect. And I've spent a lot of time sort of teasing apart my feelings there.
Yeah. And that, I mean, the city that probably has like the biggest scar as far as that's concerned is where you're from, is the city of St. Louis. And I know that there are a lot of people there that, probably view it in the same way. What's the view of that home run race in St. Louis all these years later? Because McGwire still is, am I wrong? Is he still beloved in St. Louis?
That's, I think so. I can't quite figure that out. So I will tell you guys, I actually am in St. Louis right now. I don't live there, but I got my vaccine and decided to come home and actually went to the Cardinals game last night. So first Cardinals game since 2019. And I did see a few people walking around in Mark McGwire jerseys. So there's still a presence here, for sure. But to me, at least, McGwire was this sort of like larger-than-life figure who then sort of faded quickly because the Cardinals got so good after he retired. He retired in 2001, which is the year Albert Pujols debuted. Mm-hmm. And, I think any baseball fan knows what happened after that. And so it is a sort of complicated legacy where he's responsible for these, these insane memories of this summer that really kind of left its mark on baseball. But I don't know how sort of permanent his legacy is. His number isn't retired. Dexter Fowler wore it. So it's a great question. I do think St. Louis, like you said, bears the scars of all this more than any place except maybe San Francisco.
Yeah. And maybe Chicago too, but I think they view Sosa differently because of other things. But going into the 98 season, I remember 1997 when McGwire was traded to the Cardinals, and you're like, well, this just seems to be the perfect marriage of a slugger in a baseball town that loves their team, and he's playing for the same manager. And I remember there were expectations going into that season that you may end up having a broken home run record, but nobody expected Sammy Sosa to get involved in it. It was going to be Griffey, and it was going to be Mark McGwire. So do you feel like that anticipation just sort of papered over some of the things that people saw? Like you even wrote about it. You talked about it on Crush with the AP story by Steve Wilstein about seeing Andro in the locker, and it just felt like we didn't want to hear what Steve was writing about, really, right?
Totally. That's sort of the theme of episode 2 is this sort of first shadow of a doubt over the home run race, which came when Steve Wilstein with the Associated Press found this bottle of androstenedione, which was a legal supplement at the time, but it's really a steroid precursor in Mark McGwire's locker. And I agree, no one wanted to see that. No one wanted to believe sort of the truth that lurked in Steve's story. It's crazy to me, the whole idea that we were sort of predicting this record would fall, this record that had, held for 30 some odd years prior. And can you imagine today if someone started out a baseball season and said, oh my gosh, player Mike Trout is definitely going to break the home run record. That would sound insane. So people were saying that in 1998, and people really wanted to believe in something, I think, then with baseball. I think that coming off the strike, the sport needed kind of a kick in the pants, and I think home runs were that.
Yeah, and I mean, McGwire was viewed then as, just like a beloved gentle giant, I guess, in some way. And yeah, we really were looking for a hero in that case, and really, I mean, like the hero of, you got a couple of heroes in episode 2, which I feel like I saw Derek Gould, who writes for the Post-Dispatch, covers the Cardinals in St. Louis. He even said on your he tweeted to you the same time I did about the second episode. It really should be like required listening for journalism students, because the AP was really careful about how they were going to present this supplement to the public that didn't want to hear about this supplement, didn't know what it was. So I felt like that really was a lesson in proper journalism at the same time as a good story.
Yeah, my producer and I laugh a lot about that as we're making the podcast, just how we have a lot of lessons about journalism in here. And journalism was obviously the key to all of this sort of coming forward. But yeah, like I mentioned, it was this androstenedione dione was this steroid precursor that was legal in Major League Baseball at the time. Also, Major League Baseball had no steroid policy at the time, and that's a whole other story that we'll get to later down the line. But at the time, Mark McGwire was technically doing nothing wrong by taking this pill. And so Steve Wilstein, when he saw this pill, he investigated it. He learned a ton about it. He learned that it tends to be linked to steroids. A lot of guys who take this pill also take steroids. But the only proof Steve had was this little bottle of pills in Mark McGwire's locker. And so he was very careful never to refer to it as a steroid and never to sort of cross that line, because I think the thing about all of this, and a theme that comes up throughout the podcast as the truth of steroids kind of comes forward, is that it's really important not to oversell what's going on, and to, the minute someone in this steroid era, the minute a journalist sort of reported too much or had one teeny bit of falseness to a claim, that sort of invalidates everything. And most fans didn't want to hear any of this. They really had to be convinced with kind of the pristine truth.
I don't want to give away too much about the first 2 episodes, because I'd like people to download them and listen to them, and you can get Crushed anywhere you podcast, Apple Podcasts, where I get mine. But the story of Nancy Armour, the AP sports writer who had to chase McGwire through Wrigley Field with a boot on her foot, is just an amazing story, and it made me laugh, really. I don't know if she was laughing at that moment, though, because she's got to chase McGwire, who's ignoring her, and she can barely walk.
It's a crazy story. Nancy is actually a good friend of mine. I've known her for years, and I knew that she had played a role in the story. We talked about it over the years, but I had never heard sort of the detailed story of her, like you said, in a boot because she dropped a desk on her foot, chasing Mark McGwire through Wrigley Field. And if you've ever been to Wrigley, it's this old ballpark that everything's a little smaller than it is at most Major League ballparks, and the media quarters at Wrigley are quite tight. All of the area as you're going through, and it's old and dark, and it's just, picturing it is really entertaining. But like you said, it was a stressful situation for her at the time, I think.
Yeah. Plus, I mean, she's asking a question to somebody that nobody wants to hear the answer to at that moment as well. I just got a couple of minutes left here with you, Joan. The next episode is Thursday, correct? Can you give us a preview as to what is in episode 3 of Crushed?
Yeah, I would love to. Episode 3 is, I think, my favorite episode of the podcast. And I know some of my coworkers who have heard a few of them also seem to like it. So I'm really excited for it to come out. In episode 3, we take a little pivot and we step away from the timeline of sort of the home run race and what was going on with these superstars, and really dive into the story of 2 players who use steroids. Neither of them is famous. One didn't even make the major leagues. One was a career minor leaguer. And looking at their decisions to use steroids and sort of how they were, I don't want to say forced, because everyone has free will in their decisions, but how baseball created a world in which a lot of players felt like they needed to take steroids to get ahead, whether that meant to stick on a major league roster or, frankly, just advance in the minor leagues enough to make a living wage, which is really hard to do in the minor leagues. Right. And we spend a lot of time with these 2 players who really changed my perspective on the steroid era, I would say.
Yeah, and I touched on that earlier in the show because I really I try to hesitate on viewing the steroid issue in baseball as a moral issue because I do feel like that doesn't give proper context to what was going on in the game at that time, in which a lot of players would feel like if they weren't using, they were going to fall behind. And there's no reason for me to say the guy's name or anything like that. I witnessed somebody purchasing steroids in Mexico when the AA team that I covered was on a trip to El Paso. So I saw this with my own eyes, and he told me why he was doing it, and it was to keep up with the Joneses. That's what it was all about. So the last question I hear to ask you, Joan, is, and I got into this in the last segment, there's so much focus on the players that used. What about the people that controlled the system that they played in? Bud Selig at the top of the pyramid here. Dude's in the Hall of Fame. If he's in the Hall of Fame, and he was the commissioner when all this was going down, how can you justify keeping out the users too?
I mean, I have a real problem with that. I agree. I agree that it's really tough to frame this as a moral issue because of everything you just said. There were a lot of incentives at play here, and I really don't think baseball created a system in which players had the right incentives. And I think that Major League Baseball spent a long time looking the other way and almost trying to remain ignorant on this. Bud Selig, when the story of the Anderson-Dione in Mark McGwire's locker broke, Bud Selig said, "I'd never heard of this. I had to go to my local pharmacy and ask the pharmacist what this was." And Bud Selig has said this over the years. He didn't say this to me. He said this over the years many times. And it's like, you're the commissioner of Major League Baseball. This is a supplement that's a steroid precursor that is banned by the Olympics, the NFL, the NBA. Like, how do you not know what this thing is? It's because they didn't want to know. They didn't want to get into this. They just wanted kind of the good feelings of the home run race to perpetuate.
Yeah, and they don't perpetuate any longer, that's for sure. Joan, we got to leave it there. What time, do you know what time it drops on Thursday? Because I don't have anything to do except host this show Thursday, so I'm waiting for Crush to drop Thursday.
I'm not sure exactly what time, but it will be available in, the Apple podcast store, whatever you call it, or Spotify, wherever you get your podcast by the time you're awake, unless you don't sleep. It's sometime in the wee hours of the day that it becomes available.
Well, it's great work. Really appreciate it. Would love to have you on again down the line to wrap the podcast up and get into some baseball stuff, too, because, yeah, we are playing baseball as well, and I'm glad you got to go to a Cardinals game yesterday. Thanks for your time.
Thanks so much, guys.
You got it. That's Joan Niesen from the Crushed Podcast. And you can download it anywhere you get your podcasts. I usually use Apple Podcasts, but any of the other ones, too. And she does really good work. Appreciate her time. 877-377-6963 to wrap up the show next with Get Off My Lawn.